The story begins in the far reaches of space, on a small and quiet planet that most civilizations would overlook. It was a place of strange beauty, with skies that glowed in soft shades of green and purple during the planet's long, slow sunrise. The air carried a subtle hum, almost like the planet itself was alive and breathing. Its inhabitants were a peaceful alien species, intelligent yet simple in their daily lives. They had not yet developed faster than light travel, nor had they created weapons of mass destruction. Their society was centered on harmony with their environment, understanding the natural rhythms of their forests, rivers, and mountains. Each day, they went about their routines, tending to fields, studying the stars from observatories built of carved stone, and teaching their children the ways of their world for generations. They had lived quietly, almost invisibly in the vast galaxy. They had occasional contact with nearby planets, but it was limited to trade and exchange of knowledge. Life was stable, predictable, and safe, or so they thought. But far away, beyond the bright and swirling galaxies, a danger was slowly approaching. They did not know it yet, but the universe was much larger and much more dangerous than they had ever imagined. One ordinary day, as the twin suns of their planet rose in the sky, strange readings appeared in their observatories. A signal was coming from the edge of their communication networks, a weak pulse that seemed to carry a sense of urgency. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. At first, the scientists believed it might be a natural phenomenon, perhaps a storm in the magnetic field or a rare alignment of the planet's atmosphere. But as they studied it carefully, they realized that it was not random at all. The pulses had a pattern, a deliberate rhythm that suggested intelligence. This was no storm. This was a call for help. Excitement and fear rippled through the scientists' community. To them, it was the first time their civilization had ever encountered such a clear signal from beyond their world. They quickly confirmed that it was not coming from their own planet or any nearby celestial body. It was coming from deep space, from a place they could barely identify. The realization hit them like a shock. Someone, somewhere out there in the vast emptiness of space, needed help, and they might be the only ones who could respond in time. The news spread quickly through their society. Councils were convened, leaders debated, and messages were sent to every corner of the planet. For a species that had always valued peace and caution, the idea of venturing beyond their familiar world to answer a distant SOS was both thrilling and terrifying. They knew very little about the galaxy beyond their home system. They had maps, yes, and stories passed down through generations of astronomers and explorers. But these were faint sketches of stars and planets, more imagination than reality. Still, there was an understanding that life beyond their world existed. Perhaps now it was calling to them. Meanwhile, far from their planet, other beings had already detected the same signal. The Galactic Federation, a coalition of advanced civilizations, had sophisticated instruments that monitored the cosmos for unusual activity. When they picked up the SOS, alarms rang across their communications network. The signal was weak, fragmented, and incomplete, but its urgency was unmistakable. Federation scientists worked quickly to decode it, trying to determine its origin and the nature of the danger it signaled. Every expert involved knew that such signals were rare and often dangerous. History had shown that SOS transmissions could be traps, misinterpreted warnings, or cries from civilizations already on the brink of destruction. Even as the Federation debated the proper response, another species was already moving toward the source. They were feared across countless systems, known for their immense physical strength, superior technology, and ruthless efficiency. Unlike the peaceful aliens receiving the SOS, the Deathworlders did not operate out of empathy or concern for others. They acted according to their own rules, which were often incomprehensible to outsiders. For them, a distress signal was not a call for help. It was an opportunity to explore, to test, to conquer, or simply to satisfy their curiosity in ways that could terrify anyone else. The Deathworlders' ships were enormous and menacing, with sleek designs that seemed to absorb light and energy as they moved through space. They traveled faster than conventional ships, slipping through star systems almost unseen until they were already upon a planet. The aliens who had sent the SOS had no idea that these creatures were approaching. In their minds, they were sending a message of hope, believing that someone in the galaxy would come to aid them. They imagined diplomats, scientists, or perhaps explorers who shared their values. They never imagined the Deathworlders on the planet itself. The alien society began preparations to respond to the mysterious signal. Scholars debated what to send, how to communicate, and whether they should even attempt to meet whoever or whatever was in trouble. Their technology was primitive compared to the vast galaxy around them. They had simple ships capable of leaving their atmosphere, but nothing that could travel beyond nearby star systems. Still, their ingenuity and determination were remarkable. They built devices to boost the signal, hoping to clarify the message and make contact as safely as possible. Despite their careful planning, there was an undercurrent of fear. The SOS came with a sense of urgency that could not be ignored. Some feared that the danger was already too close, that waiting might be fatal. Others were worried that by responding they might attract unwanted attention to their peaceful world. Their leaders held long debates under the shimmering sky, weighing courage against caution, compassion against survival. The planet's society had never faced such a moral dilemma. It was a turning point, a moment when the simplicity of their lives collided with the vast, chaotic reality of the galaxy. As the hours passed, signals and messages traveled through the alien communication networks, but the SOS remained fragmented and mysterious. Scientists analyzed every pulse, every variation in the rhythm, hoping to understand the threat. Some theorized that the danger was environmental, perhaps a natural disaster on a distant planet. Others feared it might be a hostile species, something aggressive and violent. Yet, despite the uncertainty, the desire to help was strong. The aliens knew that doing nothing was not an option. They felt a moral responsibility, even if the cost was unknown. Unknown to them, the Deathworlders were drawing closer with terrifying speed. Their sensors picked up the SOS almost immediately, and they calculated the quickest route to the source. To them, the signal was a curiosity, a puzzle to examine, and possibly a prize to claim. Their ships cast immense shadows across the stars, and their presence carried an energy that seemed to ripple through space itself. Any being unfortunate enough to encounter them would instinctively feel a mix of awe and dread. Back on the SOS-emitting planet, the aliens continued to prepare, unaware of the Deathworlders' arrival. Children played under the alien suns, elders taught lessons of history and survival, and scientists worked tirelessly to understand the signal. The atmosphere was tense but alive with purpose. Hope and fear existed side by side. They were about to make contact with the unknown, stepping into a wider galaxy that held wonders, dangers, and challenges they could scarcely imagine. The SOS, simple and desperate, symbolized the beginning of an extraordinary chapter in their history. It was more than a signal. It was a test of courage, ingenuity, and resilience. The aliens did not know it yet, but their world was about to be touched by forces beyond their comprehension. In the vast emptiness of space, the faint pulse of a cry for help was moving toward its answer, but that answer would come in ways they never expected, testing everything they knew about life, survival, and the unpredictable nature of the universe. And so, the stage was set. A quiet, peaceful planet, a society unprepared for the magnitude of what was to come, and a signal traveling through the darkness of space. It was a simple act, sending out a message for help, yet it carried consequences that would ripple across worlds and species alike. Little did the aliens know, their attempt to seek aid would invite not just help but a presence so powerful and fearsome that it would challenge everything they believed about the galaxy. This moment, the moment of hope, fear, and anticipation, marked the true beginning of their journey. The first step into a universe where nothing was truly safe, and where every signal might carry a danger as great as the hope it promised. The SOS had been sent, and the peaceful aliens waited with a mixture of hope and fear. They imagined someone or something coming to their aid, someone who understood the importance of helping a civilization in need. Their preparations were careful and precise, yet nothing could truly prepare them for what was about to happen. Far beyond their planet, moving through the vast emptiness of space with terrifying speed and power, the Deathworlders had detected the signal. Unlike any other species the aliens had known, the Deathworlders were not bound by empathy, morality, or diplomacy. To them, the SOS was not a cry for help. It was an opportunity to explore, dominate, or simply satisfy curiosity in ways that terrified other civilizations. As the Deathworlders approached, the peaceful aliens could not yet sense the danger. Their sensors and instruments were designed to detect natural phenomena, or perhaps the presence of nearby spacecraft, but nothing in their history had prepared them for a fleet of ships that radiated power and intimidation. The Deathworlders' vessels were enormous, far larger than anything the aliens had ever seen, and their designs were unlike anything found in the galaxy. Sleek, dark, and almost predatory, the ships seemed to consume light, casting long shadows across the cosmos as they advanced. Their sheer size and presence created a sense of dread that even the most rational minds of the aliens could feel, though they did not yet understand its source. When the Deathworlders entered the planet's system, their sensors immediately began scanning the surface. Every pulse of energy, every movement, every form of life was catalogued and analyzed. The aliens, meanwhile, continued their own work, boosting the SOS signal and attempting to clarify their message. They were focused entirely on reaching out to whoever needed help, unaware that the beings moving toward them were far from friendly. Their entire world was about to be turned upside down. The first contact happened almost without warning. From the skies above, immense shadows began to appear as the Deathworlders' ships moved into orbit. At first, the aliens could not understand what they were seeing. The ships blocked out the light of the suns in places, and a low, almost vibrating hum filled the atmosphere. Birds and animals reacted instinctively, fleeing or hiding, as if sensing an invisible danger. The people of the planet looked up, their hearts racing with fear and awe. They had sent out a message for help, and now they were confronted with an overwhelming presence they could barely comprehend. Attempts to communicate immediately failed. The Deathworlders did not respond in any conventional sense. They did not use light signals, sound waves, or transmissions in ways the aliens could interpret. Their presence alone was a statement, a demonstration of power that demanded attention. The aliens tried to send clarifying messages, hoping to explain their intentions and the reason for the SOS, but the Deathworlders ignored them or perhaps simply could not understand. The more the aliens tried to reach out, the more confused and panicked they became. The realization began to set in. They had not called for help from a friendly species. They had called for something entirely unknown and potentially dangerous. The Deathworlders began moving closer to the surface, their ships casting massive shadows over forests, mountains, and cities. People on the ground could see the sheer scale of these vessels, and fear spread quickly. Panic was not universal, but it grew as those responsible for defense and governance struggled to understand how to respond. The alien leaders convened emergency meetings, desperately attempting to formulate a plan. They had no weapons capable of matching the Deathworlders, no ships that could challenge their advanced technology. Their only advantage was their knowledge of the planet itself and their ability to act quickly in ways the invaders might not expect. Small-scale destruction began almost immediately. The Deathworlders, curious and methodical, started probing the planet. They analyzed buildings, dissected technological devices, and tested the limits of the environment. Entire sections of the cities were evacuated as the aliens realized that these beings were not merely visiting, they were examining, experimenting, and asserting their dominance. The peaceful inhabitants had never experienced such an overwhelming force, and fear mingled with confusion as they tried to understand what was happening despite the danger. Some of the aliens tried to approach the Death, attempting diplomacy in the only ways they knew how. Delegates were sent to communicate, using symbols, sounds, and gestures meant to convey peace and cooperation. But the Deathworlders did not respond as expected. They were intelligent, yes, but their intelligence was not structured around empathy or common morality. They interpreted actions differently, and even well-meaning gestures were often misunderstood. The aliens' attempts to reason with them sometimes resulted in further fear or even accidental provocation. As the Deathworlders' logic and motivations were fundamentally alien, the presence of the Deathworlders caused disruption beyond the immediate cities. The natural world reacted in strange ways. Weather patterns shifted, magnetic fields fluctuated, and some species of wildlife exhibited unusual behavior. The aliens had always prided themselves on understanding their environment, but the arrival of the Deathworlders challenged everything they knew. Their instruments recorded anomalies that had no explanation, and even the most experienced scientists could only theorize about the cause. Fear, once limited to human-like emotion, now spread to a society-wide scale, touching every corner of the planet. As the hours passed, the aliens' understanding of the situation grew, but so did their fear. They realized that the Deathworlders were not enemies in the traditional sense. They did not attack immediately, yet their very presence was a threat. Every action, every movement, every observation the Deathworlders made seemed to carry potential danger. It became clear that a single misstep could result in massive destruction. The aliens had to think carefully about every decision, balancing the desire to protect their civilization with the need to avoid provoking a response they could not survive at the same time. Panic began to take hold among the population. Families fled, schools closed, and marketplaces emptied. The alien leaders worked tirelessly to maintain order, using every means available to reassure their people while simultaneously coordinating defensive measures. They could not fight the Deathworlders directly, but they could hide, protect vulnerable populations, and try to predict the invaders' next moves. It was a delicate and dangerous game of survival, one that required both courage and ingenuity. The Deathworlders continued their methodical exploration, their actions seemingly random yet purposeful. They scanned the forests, oceans, and cities, testing the limits of technology, energy, and biology. The aliens could only watch, helpless, as these powerful beings assessed every aspect of their civilization. The SOS that had been sent as a plea for help had brought a presence far beyond their comprehension. What was meant as hope had become fear. Yet within that fear, the aliens' determination began to grow. Some of the younger members of the alien society began to see this as an opportunity rather than just a threat. They observed patterns in the Deathworlders' behavior and realized that understanding these beings might be the key to survival. Small teams of scholars and explorers took notes, documenting the invaders' movements and reactions. They worked quickly, aware that every second counted. The idea of learning from the Deathworlders rather than merely hiding or fleeing became a spark of ingenuity in an otherwise dire situation. As days passed, the aliens became more organized in their response. While fear still existed, it was tempered by knowledge, observation, and careful planning. They began to understand that survival depended not on confrontation but on strategy. They analyzed every movement of the Deathworlders, every signal, every reaction, trying to anticipate what might come next. Their society, which had never faced such a threat, that began to adapt quickly, displaying resilience and intelligence that even they had not realized they possessed. The realization was sobering. Their call for help had not gone unanswered, but it had been answered in a way they could never have imagined. Instead of aid, they had attracted beings of immense power and unpredictable intent. The peaceful world they had known was now under scrutiny, and the choices they made in the coming hours and days would determine the fate of their civilization. The stage was set for a confrontation, not of weapons, but of wits, courage, and understanding. The aliens had to survive, adapt, and learn, all while facing a presence that could obliterate everything they loved in an instant. Amidst the fear, there was a growing sense of determination. The SOS had set events in motion that were far beyond the aliens' initial intentions. Yet, within the chaos, they discovered something crucial. Even a peaceful, technologically simple civilization could respond to the unexpected with creativity, courage, and intelligence. Their challenge was immense, but their spirit was resilient. They had sent a signal into the vast unknown, and while the response was terrifying, it had awakened within them a new sense of purpose and resolve. The arrival of the Deathworlders transformed the planet. Nothing would ever be the same. The skies, once calm and beautiful, now carried immense ships that blocked the sun. Cities were shadowed, and life as the aliens knew it had shifted into a tense, high-stakes reality. Yet through observation, careful planning, and the determination to survive, the aliens began to navigate this terrifying new chapter. Their world had become a test, one that challenged everything they believed about safety, life, and the unknown dangers of the galaxy. The SOS that started it all had opened the door to a confrontation that would demand every ounce of courage, intelligence, and resilience they could muster. The tension on the alien planet had reached a breaking point. The Deathworlders, massive and mysterious, now dominated the skies, their ships moving deliberately as if inspecting the world beneath them. The peaceful aliens had done everything they could to observe, understand, and protect themselves, yet each action seemed to create more uncertainty. The presence of these powerful beings was unlike anything they had ever experienced. And now the situation escalated toward a point where even a small mistake could have disastrous consequences. Fear was spreading through the cities and villages. A fear that was palpable, heavy, and all-encompassing. The escalation began in an unexpected way. One of the alien scientists, trying to demonstrate goodwill, sent a small exploratory drone toward one of the Deathworlders' ships. Its purpose was simple: to show that the planet posed no threat and to communicate peacefully. But the Deathworlders misinterpreted this action. Their sensors, attuned to detect potential dangers or valuable objects, detected the drone as a possible attack or a test of their systems. Without warning, a surge of energy was directed at the drone, instantly destroying it in a flash of light that lit up the sky. The aliens, watching from the ground, could only stare in horror. Their small attempt at communication had been seen as defiance, and the consequences were immediate. Panic spread even faster after this incident. Families fled from their homes, leaving behind the security of their communities, and emergency shelters filled to capacity. The once quiet planet, known for its calm rivers and serene forests, now resonated with alarm signals, frantic calls, and the cries of people trying to protect themselves and their loved ones. The leaders, scientists, and elders held urgent meetings, realizing that the Deathworlders' interpretation of their actions could easily escalate into full-scale destruction. They had no conventional weapons to stop them, and their defensive measures were almost entirely symbolic against such overwhelming power. The aliens attempted more structured communication. Delegates were sent to areas where the Deathworlders' presence was heaviest, using universal symbols, gestures, and carefully constructed light patterns to convey peace. Yet these efforts were met with the same problem. The Deathworlders' reasoning and logic were fundamentally alien. They could not understand human-like intentions, compassion, or moral frameworks. Every attempt at diplomacy was a delicate balancing act. That aliens needed to express goodwill without appearing weak, and to demonstrate understanding without provoking aggression. The complexity of the task weighed heavily on them, testing their creativity and resilience in ways they had never imagined. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders continued their systematic survey of the planet. Forests were scanned, rivers and lakes analyzed, and cities catalogued with meticulous precision. The aliens began to realize that the Deathworlders' approach was both scientific and intimidating. Their interest was not casual. Every movement seemed to serve a purpose. The Deathworlders were not interested in conversation, negotiation, or diplomacy. They were observing, assessing, and determining the value of everything on the planet, including the alien civilization itself. Small settlements were inadvertently damaged during these inspections, causing further fear among the population. Amid this chaos, the aliens faced a critical decision. The destruction, though limited, was already significant. If they continued with cautious observation and communication, they risked further escalation. If they attempted to defend themselves using the primitive technologies available to them, they risked provoking a full-scale attack they could not survive. Leaders debated tirelessly. Philosophers, scholars, and military advisors argued over the best course of action. Some argued that surrender or complete submission might be the only way to survive. Others insisted on creative strategies, relying on ingenuity rather than strength. Every moment spent debating was another moment of uncertainty as the Deathworlders continued their silent inspection from above. The first real confrontation occurred when a small defensive team, fearing the potential for sudden aggression, attempted to protect a settlement under one of the Deathworlders' ships. Their weapons were simple energy pulses, incapable of penetrating the hulls of the massive vessels. Yet the Deathworlders detected these signals as hostile. They responded with overwhelming force, creating shockwaves that flattened structures and sent debris flying through the air. The aliens had anticipated danger, but the scale and speed of this reaction were terrifying. This moment became the critical turning point. The aliens understood that the Deathworlders' interpretation of any action could have catastrophic consequences, and that their survival depended on immediate, clever strategies rather than direct confrontation. In this high-stakes environment, the aliens realized they had to leverage every advantage their world offered. They knew the terrain intimately. Forests, mountains, caves, and rivers could all be used to create protective zones and hide sensitive areas. Small teams began to work in secret, moving populations and critical resources to safe locations, while others focused on understanding the behavior of the Death. Observation became their most powerful tool. By studying patterns, routines, and reactions, they hoped to predict actions and minimize destruction. Every action had to be deliberate, every decision carefully considered, because the margin for error was almost non-existent. Tensions within the alien society were also rising. Fear caused disagreements among leaders, arguments among scientists, and panic among citizens. Yet it was precisely this tension that sparked ingenuity. Some young scholars began noticing subtle patterns in the Deathworlders' scans and movements. For instance, the massive vessels would pause at certain intervals, or certain energy emissions caused the Deathworlders to react in predictable ways. These observations became crucial. They allowed the aliens to plan minimal-risk interventions and create diversions when necessary. What had begun as sheer panic slowly evolved into strategic thinking under immense pressure. The aliens also realized that time was critical. Every hour spent exposed to the Deathworlders' presence increased the likelihood of accidental provocation or misunderstanding. Evacuation plans, emergency shelters, and hidden communication networks were activated. Citizens were instructed to remain calm, follow directives, and observe strict safety measures. Teachers, elders, and local leaders became vital in maintaining order, ensuring that the population could survive long enough to implement larger strategies. It was a society-wide effort, uniting civilians, scholars, and leaders under the most dangerous circumstances they had ever faced. Yet, even as they organized, fear persisted. The Deathworlders were not simply inspecting, they were testing. Their sensors detected life signs, energy patterns, and technological emissions. Every human-like or alien-like activity could be seen as a threat or an opportunity, depending on interpretation. The aliens had to adapt constantly, altering routines, modifying signals, and carefully controlling the visibility of their actions. The challenge was immense: survive without provoking, communicate without misunderstanding, and protect life without direct confrontation. It was a delicate balance, a game where the stakes were nothing less than the existence of their civilization. The critical moment came when a misinterpreted defensive action nearly triggered total catastrophe. A group of aliens, in a desperate attempt to shield a critical facility, activated energy barriers that emitted pulses detectable by the Deathworlders' advanced sensors. The pulses, meant to protect, were interpreted as hostile. Within moments, a surge of energy was projected toward the area, creating massive shockwaves. Buildings collapsed, energy lines overloaded, and panic reached new heights. Citizens ran blindly, seeking shelter, while leaders scrambled to prevent further escalation. The alien survival instincts had been tested to their absolute limits, and it became clear that intelligence, observation, and courage were the only tools that could save them. Amid the chaos, a small group of diplomats and strategists worked tirelessly to find a solution. They realized that conventional communication would not suffice. Instead, they needed to appeal to the Deathworlders' unique sense of logic and curiosity. By presenting controlled demonstrations of knowledge, offering glimpses of valuable resources, and signaling non-aggression in ways that the Deathworlders could interpret, they hoped to de-escalate the situation. It was a gamble. The smallest miscalculation could trigger annihilation, but it was the only viable path forward. By the end of this critical period, the aliens had learned several essential lessons. First, the Deathworlders' logic and morality were entirely alien. They could not be assumed to behave like other species. Second, patience, observation, and strategy were more effective than weapons or direct confrontation. Third, unity within the alien society was vital. Panic and fragmentation only increased vulnerability. And finally, the aliens discovered a remarkable resilience within themselves, a capacity to adapt, think creatively, and act decisively under extreme pressure. These realizations would become the foundation for the next phase of the encounter, their effort to survive and possibly turn the situation in their favor. The planet, scarred but still standing, had entered the most dangerous phase of the encounter. Every individual, every group, every action mattered. The Deathworlders were not enemies in the traditional sense. They were unpredictable, immensely powerful, and constantly observing. The aliens had survived so far through ingenuity, careful planning, and courage, but the outcome remained uncertain. The critical moment had arrived, and what happened next would determine whether their civilization endured or faced destruction. The aliens had reached a critical point. Their planet had survived the initial scrutiny and accidental aggression from the Deathworlders. But the threat was far from over. Every day, every moment, they were under observation by beings whose strength and intelligence surpassed anything the aliens had ever encountered. Yet, amid the fear and chaos, a plan was slowly forming a way to turn the terrifying presence of the Deathworlders from a potential disaster into an opportunity for survival. The aliens understood that they could not fight with force. Their technology was primitive compared to the immense power above them. They had to rely on ingenuity, strategy, and the one thing that had so far kept them alive, understanding the Deathworlders' behavior. The first step in their resolution was careful observation. Teams of scientists, scholars, and strategists worked tirelessly, tracking every movement, every sensor sweep, every minor adjustment made by the Deathworlders' ships. Patterns began to emerge. The Deathworlders were methodical, even predictable in some aspects. Certain energy emissions caused them to pause. Others triggered scanning sequences that seemed to reveal curiosity rather than hostility. Slowly, the aliens realized that if they could appeal to these patterns, they could guide the Deathworlders' actions and prevent further accidental destruction. Observation became their most powerful weapon. At the same time, the aliens focused on communication, not in the traditional sense but in ways that the Deathworlders could interpret. They began sending controlled signals, carefully crafted to show intelligence, capability, and non-aggression. These signals were subtle, using energy pulses and light patterns instead of words or sound. The goal was not to negotiate in a human sense but to create a framework that the Deathworlders could recognize, a signal that indicated, "We are not a threat, but we are intelligent and capable of valuable knowledge." This approach was delicate. One wrong pattern, one misunderstood pulse, could have provoked catastrophic retaliation. To complement these signals, the aliens created small demonstrations of their planet's potential value. They highlighted natural resources, unique energy sources, and areas of knowledge that might interest the Death. These were not meant as bribes or offerings in the traditional sense, but as strategic presentations of intelligence and utility. The aliens understood that the Deathworlders were not malicious in the human sense. They were driven by curiosity and efficiency. If the aliens could capture that curiosity without triggering aggression, they might survive. Physical adaptation and protection became another key element. Although their weapons could not challenge the Deathworlders, the aliens used their intimate knowledge of the planet to protect civilians and vital infrastructure. People were relocated to hidden valleys, subterranean chambers, and shielded areas that took advantage of natural terrain. Entire populations were moved without causing panic, using coordinated signals, routes, and shelters that minimized visibility to the Deathworlders' sensors. In doing so, they reduced the risk of accidental damage and preserved critical resources. For the long term, a significant breakthrough came when one of the alien teams noticed a pattern in the Deathworlders' inspection cycles. The massive ships, although seemingly random, had intervals of interest and inattention. During certain periods, the ships would hover without scanning, almost as if the Deathworlders were studying energy flow rather than the surface itself. By identifying these windows, the aliens could carry out critical protective and observational actions safely, adjusting energy emissions, relocating populations, and maintaining the signals that conveyed intelligence and non-aggression. Timing became as important as strategy. As days passed, the aliens also began to test indirect communication. They created complex energy patterns that mimicked environmental phenomena but were carefully structured to convey information. The Deathworlders responded. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, they began to alter their behavior. Their movements became less aggressive, their scans more focused on areas of interest rather than random destruction. The aliens realized that they had begun to influence the Deathworlders' actions without confrontation. This small success bolstered confidence and provided hope that the crisis could be managed. The aliens' leaders recognized that unity was essential. The planet's society had always valued cooperation, but this crisis demanded unprecedented coordination. Scholars, strategists, engineers, and leaders worked together in ways they had never before attempted. Emergency councils were established, communication networks optimized, and decision-making centralized while still allowing for local autonomy. Every citizen had a role, whether in observation, shelter management, energy monitoring, or information relay. The societal cohesion became a critical tool in survival, demonstrating that intelligence and organization could rival brute strength in effectiveness. Despite progress, tension remained. The Deathworlders were unpredictable in some aspects, and any miscalculation could lead to sudden escalation. The aliens knew that survival depended on vigilance, patience, and the ability to adapt instantly. Small errors, previously inconsequential, now carried life-or-death consequences. Every action had to be deliberate, measured, and informed by observation. Yet, this pressure also inspired remarkable ingenuity. The aliens developed creative solutions, combining technology, natural resources, and environmental knowledge in ways that showcased adaptability and intelligence to the Deathworlders. A pivotal moment came when the aliens decided to demonstrate their knowledge in a visible but safe way. Using energy displays, they highlighted patterns of planetary resources, technological innovation, and biological understanding. The Deathworlders, intrigued by these displays, paused longer over the signals and adjusted their scanning methods to focus on the information presented. The aliens had effectively turned the situation into a controlled demonstration, showing intelligence and value without threatening force. This act of calculated transparency was risky but crucial. It marked a shift from reactive survival to proactive engagement. The combination of careful observation, indirect communication, and strategic demonstration began to reshape the dynamic. The Deathworlders were no longer simply an overwhelming presence. They had become participants in a subtle negotiation of perception. The aliens had discovered that survival was not about challenging strengths but about understanding it, appealing to curiosity, and presenting themselves as beings worth observing rather than destroying. This insight transformed their approach from fear-driven reaction to calculated interaction, a turning point that would define the resolution of the crisis. Over time, the aliens also began documenting the encounter for future reference. Every action, every response, every signal sent and received was carefully recorded. These records were not only practical for immediate survival but also for building a legacy of knowledge. They understood that this encounter, terrifying as it was, could teach lessons for generations about resilience, strategy, and interaction with beings far beyond their comprehension. Knowledge became a weapon of survival, an anchor of hope, and a path to eventual recovery. Eventually, the Deathworlders began to withdraw, influenced by the patterns of communication and demonstration the aliens had carefully established. Their ships moved to higher orbits. Their scans became less intrusive, and their presence, though still immense, no longer threatened immediate destruction. The aliens had managed to survive through a combination of ingenuity, courage, strategic communication, and environmental mastery. Their civilization, though tested to the extreme, had endured. They had transformed fear into understanding, chaos into a structured response, and potential disaster into an opportunity for growth and learning. In the aftermath of this resolution, the aliens reflected on the lessons learned. They realized that survival was not always about strength, speed, or firepower. Intelligence, observation, patience, creativity, and unity could achieve what raw power could not. They had learned to interpret alien behavior, adapt to unpredictable circumstances, and communicate in ways beyond conventional understanding. The crisis had forged a stronger society, more resilient and capable than it had been before. The Deathworlders' departure did not mark the end of vigilance, but it represented a crucial turning point. The aliens had demonstrated that even in the presence of beings far superior in strength and technology, survival was possible through intelligence, strategy, and careful action. They had not only preserved their civilization but had gained insight into the broader galaxy and the complex dynamics of life beyond their world. The encounter, terrifying as it had been, became a story of resilience, adaptability, and the power of calculated action in the face of overwhelming odds. By the end of this period, the aliens had achieved a precarious peace. The Deathworlders remained in orbit briefly, studying the energy signals and subtle demonstrations of intelligence, but eventually moved on, their curiosity satisfied without the need for destruction. The planet, though scarred in places, was intact. Cities could be rebuilt, forests restored, and life could continue. Most importantly, the aliens had proven to themselves that survival was possible even in the most extreme circumstances. Through these trials, the aliens gained something beyond mere survival. They developed a deeper understanding of themselves and the galaxy around them. They recognized the fragility of life and the importance of foresight, strategy, and unity. The resolution of the crisis demonstrated that intelligence, when combined with courage and careful planning, could overcome even the most powerful forces. The planet had endured, not through sheer power, but through wisdom, adaptability, and the careful management of fear and opportunity. The aftermath of the encounter with the Deathworlders brought a mixture of relief, reflection, and new awareness to the alien civilization. The planet, once calm and peaceful, had been transformed by the terrifying presence of beings far beyond their comprehension. Though the immediate danger had passed, the lessons and experiences from the event lingered in every aspect of their society. People walked the streets more cautiously, aware of the fragility of life in the vast galaxy. Families rebuilt homes that had been damaged, but every structure, every plan, every new design now carried a hidden lesson from the recent crisis. The aliens had survived, but survival had come with a deep understanding that the universe was far more complex and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The first realization that dawned upon the people was the value of knowledge. Every observation they had made during the encounter, every pattern noticed, every signal sent and interpreted, became a treasure of experience. They documented meticulously, creating archives and records not only of the events themselves but also of the strategies that had kept them alive. These records were intended for future generations, a way to ensure that if the Deathworlders or any other powerful beings returned, the aliens would be better prepared. Knowledge had become a shield, a defense more powerful than any weapon they could wield. Communication and diplomacy, in their most abstract form, also emerged as a vital lesson. The aliens had learned that survival was not always about confrontation or strength. Sometimes, subtlety, observation, and understanding were the most effective tools. By carefully analyzing the Deathworlders' behavior and responding in ways that conveyed intelligence without aggression, they had preserved their civilization. This realization reshaped their approach to interaction with other species. They understood that the galaxy was filled with beings whose logic and morality could differ completely from their own. To navigate this vast, unpredictable environment, patience, observation, and strategic communication were as essential as courage and creativity. That at the societal level, the experience strengthened unity. During the critical moments of the encounter, fear had threatened to divide the people. Some argued over strategies, others panicked, and yet others were paralyzed by indecision. But through the shared effort of observation, planning, and execution, the society had discovered the power of collaboration. Scholars, leaders, and citizens of all kinds had worked together in unprecedented ways. This newfound cohesion became a cornerstone for the society's future. They realized that unity, combined with intelligence and adaptability, could overcome challenges that would have seemed impossible before. The encounter also left a lasting impression on individual perspectives. People who had once felt safe within their familiar routines now carried a heightened awareness of the galaxy's vastness and unpredictability. Fear, though no longer immediate, had left a mark. Citizens became more attentive, more careful, and more reflective. Children learned the importance of observation, of thinking ahead, and of understanding the consequences of actions in a universe that could respond in ways they might not anticipate. Parents taught resilience alongside everyday lessons. Scholars taught creativity and problem-solving as a matter of survival, emphasizing that adaptability was more valuable than strength alone. The aliens also gained a new appreciation for the role of courage in everyday life. Courage was not just about facing the Deathworlders directly, it was about maintaining clarity under pressure, making critical decisions with limited information, and acting decisively in moments of uncertainty. Many individuals who had never seen themselves as leaders found themselves guiding communities through shelter relocation, energy management, and observation efforts. The experience reshaped their understanding of heroism. It was as much about wisdom, strategy, and collaboration as it was about bravery. The planet itself became a symbol of resilience. Though scarred in places by the Deathworlders' inspection and accidental destruction, it remained habitable. Rivers flowed again, forests grew back, and cities were slowly rebuilt with new knowledge in mind. Engineers and architects incorporated lessons learned from the encounter into designs, ensuring that future generations would be better protected. Urban planning now accounted for potential threats from above. Energy systems were adapted to hide or mislead outside observers, and shelters were designed to ensure safety without panic. The environment, once taken for granted, became a partner in survival, a tool to be understood and leveraged rather than merely inhabited. Cultural shifts also emerged from the experience. Stories of the Deathworlders, their vast ships, and the near-catastrophic misunderstandings spread throughout the population. These stories were not just tales of fear, they were lessons in observation, patience, and ingenuity. Art, literature, and music reflected the encounter, celebrating the resilience of the species and the lessons learned. These cultural expressions served as both remembrance and teaching tools, ensuring that the knowledge gained from the event would remain alive in collective memory. The encounter had another unexpected effect. It reshaped the society's understanding of their place in the galaxy. Before, they had lived largely in isolation, confident in the safety of their distant planet. The SOS had been sent with the hope of assistance from unknown beings, and the response had been far from what they expected. They realized that the galaxy was not only populated but also unpredictable. There were beings capable of immense power, with ways of thinking and perceiving the universe that could not be easily understood. This realization brought humility, but also a new sense of responsibility. They understood that future interactions with other species would require preparation, observation, and strategic thinking. They were no longer naive about the cosmos. They were awake to its dangers and opportunities alike. The encounter also reinforced the importance of adaptability. The aliens had survived because they were able to change their approach in real time, learning from each observation, each reaction of the Deathworlders, and each minor event that unfolded. Flexibility, rather than rigid planning, had proven crucial. This lesson extended to every level of society. Education, governance, science, and daily life were all adapted to encourage adaptive thinking. Citizens were taught to anticipate change, to observe closely, and to act thoughtfully. Adaptability became a defining trait of the civilization, ensuring that they would be better prepared for whatever future challenges the galaxy might bring. Psychologically, the encounter left a profound mark. Survivors reported a heightened awareness, a keener sense of their environment, and an appreciation for the fragility of life. Children were taught the story not only as a historical event but also as a guide for thinking, problem-solving, and understanding others. The population understood that fear could be managed through intelligence, strategy, and unity. They also learned that appearances could be deceptive just because a being seemed hostile or incomprehensible did not mean it was invincible or unmanageable. In the years that followed, the alien civilization slowly rebuilt, incorporating the lessons of the encounter into every aspect of life. Education focused on observation, communication, and understanding the broader universe. Scientists and scholars developed new tools for monitoring signals from space, learning to differentiate between potential threats and opportunities. Leaders were trained in strategy, negotiation, and crisis management. Even art and culture reflected the encounter, reminding each generation of the importance of vigilance, intelligence, and unity. Perhaps the most important reflection was philosophical. The aliens began to see life in the galaxy not as a static, predictable system but as a dynamic network of possibilities, risks, and interactions. The universe could offer help, danger, knowledge, and power all at the same time. Their perspective shifted from isolation to cautious engagement, understanding that their survival depended not only on their own actions but also on their ability to read, respond to, and anticipate the actions of others. They embraced a philosophy of balance. The strength of mind and spirit could compensate for limitations in technology or power. The encounter with the Death that became a defining moment in the civilization's history. It was a story of terror, yes, but also of ingenuity, resilience, and survival. The aliens had faced beings far beyond their comprehension and had navigated the crisis through intelligence, creativity, and cooperation. They had preserved their society, protected their people, and emerged stronger than before. The experience reshaped not only their understanding of danger but also their understanding of themselves, their potential, and the vast, unpredictable universe around them. Ultimately, the lesson was clear. Survival in the galaxy required more than courage alone. It required observation, intelligence, adaptability, and unity. The aliens had learned to face the unknown not with panic, but with strategy. They had learned to communicate across the vast gulf of difference and to anticipate reactions from beings whose logic and morality were entirely alien. They had learned that even in the most terrifying circumstances, a combination of ingenuity, patience, and courage could preserve life, ensure survival, and create opportunities for growth. The SOS, once a desperate plea for help, that had become a turning point in their civilization's history. It had revealed dangers, tested their limits, and demonstrated the power of careful observation and strategic thinking. The Deathworlders, once a symbol of fear and potential destruction, had inadvertently taught the aliens invaluable lessons. By surviving, documenting, and learning, the aliens transformed a near-catastrophic encounter into a foundation for future resilience, wisdom, and preparedness. Their civilization would never be the same, but it would endure, stronger, wiser, and more capable of navigating the vast, unpredictable expanse of the galaxy. The reflection on the entire ordeal became a central part of their culture. Stories, songs, and teachings emphasized the importance of preparation, observation, unity, and courage under pressure. Every child learned that intelligence and strategic thinking could be as powerful as any weapon. Every adult carried the understanding that life in the galaxy was unpredictable, and that survival depended on the careful balance of courage, patience, and insight. The SOS had set events in motion that forever changed their world, leaving a legacy of knowledge, resilience, and hope. In the end, the aliens emerged not just as survivors, but as a civilization transformed. The galaxy was no longer a distant, abstract concept. It was a reality filled with unknown possibilities, dangers, and lessons. They understood that they were part of a larger cosmic web, where intelligence, strategy, and cooperation could make the difference between survival and destruction. The encounter with the Deathworlders had tested every aspect of their society, their culture, and their individual capacities. They had passed the test, not through power or force, but through ingenuity, courage, and adaptability, leaving them better prepared for the challenges that lay ahead.